My passion was globalization. So I wanted to be global. I thought from the very time being. My law degree was in international trade. My MBA was concluded in international business. So right from the very beginning, I have this passion of globalization and what was going to happen in the context of business and the business environment. So I took AT&T. I built up a separate division with 4 people, and when I left AT&T, there were 500 people in it, and we had a revenue of about $7 billion. And the top 2,400 multinationals in the world is what I was managing at that point. But then, you phase in, phase out. So I went up to a point which was the peak in 1998, around 2000. Then that's where I felt the company was going to be very disoriented in terms of its vision, because the management changes, the new CEOs come in, and everybody has their own vision of how they would like to conclude and take the company over. So that's when I left. And I think I left so for the right reasons, because I think it was a spiritual calling. So sometimes, what we call it is somebody just draws you in. So I think it was a spiritual moment that said, I must do something different in life. Enough of globalization, enough of my mortal existence. I also started up 2 businesses, actually, startups. The first one I failed. I had no experience in business. I was never inclined towards doing business, so we concluded that it wasn't for us. But the next one I started off, it gave me a lot more confidence, and then we built up this business with some software engineers and guys from Microsoft, and we built a company. And then soon enough sold it off with this whole internet boom that was going on with the B2B marketplaces. And so I was done with my startup experience as well. Soon after I left my second startup, which we sold off for some profit. And I kept myself away from the business. I disconnected myself from everything, because I think God at least wanted me to do something for Him rather than focusing on myself. And then soon after, 9/11 happened, which was which was a very, very big event, at least in the United States, in 2001. So 9/11 absolutely took me away from everything, and I said the world is going to be very different from now on. So I always had this quest as to find out what would be the global framework and the phenomena after 9/11. So within that context, I surrendered myself to the will of the Lord, as we call it, and hence I started my spiritual journey in that context. Now, as a human being, I didn't know where to start. Basically, I just started on my own. So something came to me and said, okay, maybe I just need to find out about myself, who I am, where I belong to, what am I really all about? It's not about the who, but what was the question that I was trying to answer. What is it that is inside of me? What is it that I'm all about? Not is this who I am. Everybody knows who they are. But the most difficult part is to understand the what in every human being. I just kept thinking to myself as to what is the reason. There must be a reason why we are not accomplishing the end game. And I then found out soon there was no trust. So trust became a very big issue. Global distrust amongst partners, amongst alliances, amongst people. And hence, that even further escalated into a framework, what I call as global corporate distrust, in which companies like Enron, MCI, WorldCom, a lot of companies in the United States came under that pressure. And hence, there's a big scam about Enron, which was a very large power company. Actually, Tata's was also involved in that. And I'm buying one of the plants in India. So all that was very disheartening within myself. And I said, this is the root cause of why we are going through right now after having built such a global framework within AT&T. So I disassociated myself from everything. Within that context, I found out Swami Rama, who was an Indian yogi who had migrated to the United States in 1967. And he had written very good books on Bhagavad Gita and its psychology. And he opened up an institute in Pennsylvania, which is not too far from where I live in New Jersey. So now in Hinduism, we talk about 3 or 4 phases in life. We talk about the brahmacharya, which is what you are growing up as, you're studying, you're going to school. And then is the Grihasthacharya, when you get married. Of course, there's the law of creation when you multiply and you have your own family and you put it in that perspective or in that order. Then it is the Vairagya, which means you have to disassociate it with everything that you're attached with and then live in that Vairagya and then go for the higher power or go for the higher energy or go for the higher spirit or the force, whichever way you want to believe it. And the last stage is what we call as sannyas. As you give up everything, then you're gone. You're a sadhu, saint, rishi, maharshi, whatever it might be. Self-realization is basically what I wanted to adopt. Not to any religion, not to any faith. I wasn't a Christian, I wasn't a Hindu, I wasn't a Muslim, I wasn't a Sikh, or association of any of those wouldn't have been possible unless I realized myself. So the journey started with a book in Zen, Buddhism, which says you basically do your homework first. So put your works in place. In self-realization, you would call it as karma, your karam yoga. So my past, I started to write everything about my past. What went wrong, why it happened, what caused pain, what was the reason for that. I put it all in perspective in self-analysis, basically. And that was like about a good 50, 60 pages of my story in my mortal life. Then I associated myself to what I call as steps in karma yoga. I guess the journey actually started off with self-analysis, basically. And you put it in perspective of your mortal life. What is it that you have done since you were born? Because I never realized that I was attached to my family, to my friends, to my paycheck, and to everything that I owned and my assets. There was a lot of pain. And in that pain, I started to indoctrinate, take upon spiritual elements in nature. So I used to go out camp for weeks and months in the United States, do fishing and be with the wildlife and the nature. And I started to study books and several types of books, including sciences, metaphysics, mind, consciousness, its relationship with the mind. And the whole notion about future mind, future memory, everything came about. And slowly, I compiled everything together, which actually became my janana, which is Gyan. And that Gyan became very powerful from within inside of myself. So, which is what is termed as Gyan Yoga, is you have to build your own intellectual property and your own Gyan, your own Vidya. So I started to build my own Vidya, as we call it, my own sciences and metaphysics, in sciences connected to spirituality and connected to post-mortal life after this journey had transcended into self-realization. I never touched the Bhagavad Gita after that. So what happened was, it came about in 2005, while I was still involved with the family, that I became so highly conscious, my consciousness was so high, that I realized into something external. And it was perhaps maybe an external force or a spirit, as we call it. In Hinduism, we call it the Purusha. And Purusha is what it is, the spirit. We are bound in Purusha. Between you and I is the space which is occupied by the Purusha, or the Great Spirit. In Christianity, they call it the Holy Spirit. In Buddhism, calls it the Great Spirit. In every language, every form of faith, religion, there is an element of what we call as the Purusha. And it is the Purusha which is a constant, and it remains within inside of you. Once you inherit it, I became so feeble. I used to shake like a leaf. And when I started shaking like a leaf, I told my wife at that point that I need to do something. It has to exalt. It has to come out, because I can't live like this. So I started to read scriptures, the story of Jesus, the story of, there was a very good movie that was made called The Passion of Christ. So I started to watch it over and over again and just became very passionate about Christ and his journey and the misery he went through and the power of atonement, which is what is written in biblical principles, is the power of atonement, which is what Christianity is all about. Or even for that matter, even Sikhism. The Sikhs had so many gurus that atoned their life or made the sacrifices, right before the Guru Granth Sahib was compiled by Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So in every faith religion which has been accomplished, there is a spirit of sacrifice by some guru, by some leader, or by some, human being that then has fallen into some form of faith, religion, and henceforth. So in my own spiritual context, I wanted to tell them that there was some ordinance I had to perform. I had to get out of this, something has to exalt from within inside of myself. And I didn't know what it was. So I chose to get baptized in the church. It's because I had to go, and I said, okay, let me find out if this is true or false. I didn't want to leave anything to question. It was on my spiritual experiences. Two missionaries showed up on my doorstep and they said, you're called in and this is the church and here it is and this is the Bible, this is the gospel, these are the principles, this is what we do. I said, fine, you've come here, it's great, but give it to me in that perspective so that I can read a little bit more about it. I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Hindu, I'm not a Sikh, I'm just a human being on the spiritual journey and I've done enough of, but I'm not in favor of any organized religion at this moment. But I would like to perform an ordinance, a ritual, and I'd like to see what it is. So they said, fine, you can come in and get baptized in the church. And we have a baptism, it's a covenant, it's an ordinance. And so I went ahead, they scheduled a date, February 27th, 2005. This is when I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. I was a very knowledgeable guy, he knew everything about it. And he's not an average bishop as to see like a, in the churches. He worked for American Express at that point. And hence, but he had a lot of knowledge of the saints. These are saints that preached the gospel after the death of Christ and hence followed those footsteps. This is just a journey, I'm just trying to experience it. And the journey hasn't ended. It is just a beginning. So once I chose to get baptized, I went home, I told everybody. The same night, it was a miracle experience that lightning went through me from head to toe. There was a lightning that exalted through me, that went through me. Now you can call it in metaphysical sense, in consciousness, but there was some external force that exalted through me. And that was a moment when I separated my body from the soul. So it was real. I documented everything. For 5 days, I was sleeping and nobody could wake me up. I didn't know where I was. When I finally woke up, I was as light as a feather. I was like a feather. Like you can, blow me away into the wind and I would just be blown away. So it was a very, very, very spiritual as well as a very delicate experience. And all it was meditation on the Gayatri Mantra. This is when I started off in that context. And that was somewhere in 2006. And then I meditated for hours. And I did yoga, I did running, the whole exercise. And then whenever I found time for 4 or 5 hours, I'll go back to the bookstore, to the Barnes & Noble or Borders, which was very close to my house, and read books. In all kinds of spiritual books in the context of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and any other, and even Islam for that matter. Then once I got the books from the church, and they were very fine revelations and scriptures, just like we have the shaloks and we have the mantras, they have the revelations from their prophets. Just like, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament written in the gospel, which is the preachings of Christ and in the New Testament, and then Old Testament is all about the history, and the journey of Moses and so on and so forth. So I read whole thing. So I read about maybe close to 60 or 70,000 verses, scriptures, which was the toughest part. Because in order to understand and indoctrinate, or what we call as redemption in Christianity, you have to pass through that phase of the Holy Spirit. So you must exalt. That must run through you, just like Christ actually when he atoned. And his power of atonement was the Spirit of God when the lightning struck him because he was in so much of pain that God actually took his life away and ended.
Somebody. لقد يسوع سبتني Interficideus! Milites! Roma digni domestis! Celeriter! Celeriter! Facite murus mastrum! Celeriter! Frangite crura! Interficideus! Rapide, rapide! Cassius! Festina! Mortus est! Ave procerto!